Hello, friends. I'm sure you're curious about the dynamics deck and how it helps identify and address culture and behavior in the workplace. So, I'd like to take you through the dynamics deck in practice. I'll walk you through a delicate scenario with a teacher. Let's call her Anna. And I'll show you how you could use the dynamics deck to work through the problem without blame, without labels, and with some practical next steps that could help Anna to move forward with purpose. There's quite a bit to unpack, so grab a coffee and get comfortable. So first off, before I meet Anna, I want to ensure that I'm personally in the right frame of mind, in a resourceful state. So I might spend a few moments to work through the frame. I check my focus. In this case, the goal is better collaboration and better outcomes for staff and ultimately for students. It's not about ego or proving who's right. And in this case, the specific focus would be to help Anna appreciate that some patterns of behavior are having a negative impact on those around her. This would be a necessary conversation before things escalate further. I regulate and reflect. I want to settle my state so that I'm curious and not reactive. I might have had some interactions in the past with Anna, and I don't want unnecessary leakage of past situations into this conversation if I can avoid it. I also don't want pressures that I'm feeling in my day job to affect how this conversation is going to go. I briefly assess perspectives. What have I heard from assistants or other people in my team, from Anna herself, from direct observations? I try to consider how my perspective may be very different from Anna's in this situation. If necessary, I might need to ask her line manager if there are other pressing issues that she's dealing with that I should be aware of. I would want to map a couple of likely pathways with the cards. This is where I think through which of the 9 dynamics is most likely to have the biggest influence. And I'm ready to exit with commitment. What kind of agreements would be good, and a plan to follow up. Now let me tell you about Anna. She's a very capable primary teacher, but recently relationships with teaching assistants have felt strained. Some assistants have actually come forward to express that they experience her as being bossy and that's impacting the way that they're doing their work. I know that she's previously described herself as clear and efficient. So there are many potential layers here. It could be Anna's delivery versus what she's actually intending behind the scenes. There's team norms at play, and maybe the safety people feel to speak up. The situation could escalate to a formal bullying in the workplace issue, or it could be a witch hunt. I have to bear all of these different perspectives in mind. So before I talk about Anna, I take some time to lay out the dynamics grid for myself, and I ask myself these 2 quick questions to help orientate myself. What's the kind of challenge here? That's my domain of practice. Is it relational, operational, or strategic? And from what I know at this stage, it's relational and it's operational. It's about how people are experiencing one another, but it's affecting people's routines and responsibilities. And where does it primarily live? That's the scope of influence. Is it self, team, or system? And in this case, it looks like it's mostly team. It's the interplay between Anna and the assistants, not a school-wide policy problem. So that puts me within relational team, and that's 1.2, psychological safety. Or it could be operational team, which would be 2.2, the team focus. The grid helps us to identify whether the issue is about people, practice, or perspective, and whether it lives more in self, team, or system. Now that's not to say that it's nailed down forever. It's called a dynamic for a reason. Situations change, additional insights emerge, but for now, this is a good starting point. In Anna's case, I'm going to focus on the scenario from the team focus called the benevolent dictator. I think the card is sufficiently disassociated to be able to discuss it with her, but close enough to spot parallels to her behaviors when we unpack it later. I'll review the coach's notes to remind myself of some of the key insights that will likely emerge from the scenario. On the card, I check to see which subdynamic is at play here. This one's it's an unhelpful mindset, which is attitude towards collaboration. This is important because it connects and it directs us to where to look for follow-up information. So now I follow the subdynamic on the cognitive reframe cards. There are 2 reframe cards that connect to the same subdynamic. And there are a couple of mental traps that Anna may be falling into, and some mental patterns, something to be attentive to when discussing the scenario with her, and in particular when we pivot to Anna's own situation. These cognitive reframe strategies are important here, so I might put those cards on the side and have them ready in case I want to refer to them later. Maybe just for reference, but if the situation develops, it's something that I can take out and I can use the prompts on the cards directly with Anna. But I also check the practice builder cards and go with the same subdynamic. Again, this gives some tangible ideas as to some practical strategies that we might get to agreement on as a way forward. And this is all part of the exit preparation. A goal might be for Anna in this situation to have a productive conversation with her team about roles and responsibilities, for example. But it's not set in stone. Much will depend on Anna and what surfaces through the conversation with her. Now, I remind myself before the meeting as well that strong emotions may surface, which is why I want to regulate my own emotions first to make sure that I have a fresh approach to the conversation and to make sure that there are no lingering emotions from my side from meetings I may have had earlier in the day. I'd also remind myself of START, 5 common stages people go through when faced with that difficult conversation. The first is shock, followed by tension, acknowledgement, realignment, and transformation. So I won't be surprised if Anna has an emotional reaction to the conversation, to being faced with how people feel or perceive her behaviors. And I can be ready to help to recognize where she is and to help move through these stages. When Anna comes into the room, it's important to set a safe and curious tone. So rather than diving straight into addressing the issue head on with feedback for her, I want to pace her experience and try to disarm any defensiveness. So I might say something like this. Anna, I can imagine you're a little bit curious about this meeting and maybe a bit anxious too. That's completely natural when the purpose isn't entirely clear. I know it's nice to have a detailed agenda, but in this case, I know my meeting invite was more vague. This acknowledges what she's probably feeling, anxious. It names it, and hopefully creates a slight laugh, albeit probably just a silent one, but to release some tension. This is a process of pacing and leading. By starting with a mind reading, both the curiosity and anxiety, that paces her likely inner state so that she can feel understood. Then you can lead towards curiosity and openness. And I know it sounds like it takes more to explain it than the actual phrases used, but when you think about it, how we build connections with people, how we build rapport, words are important, as is our own body language. Hence the need for being well-grounded before the meeting. I might use what's called a presupposition of value, something like, I want to have a quick discussion, but an important one about some observations that have been made. They're worth putting on the table so we can make sense of them together. Let me reassure you, this isn't about blame. It's about making your working life easier and building a stronger collaboration with the team around you. Okay, so let's break it down. Presuppositions of value. Quick but important discussion, worth putting on the table. This implies that what follows will be useful and manageable. Also note that I'll be intentionally using hand gestures. If you're interested, Virginia Satier's work on hand gestures was pivotal for me, and of course there's numerous other analysts who specialize in body language. I would tend to use arms out with palms up as the placator for some phrases to show calm and participation, whereas I'd probably use the leveler with palms down when saying, "Let me reassure you," and then turning palms up again as I transition to, "It's about making our working life easier." Okay, so I might soften then with an embedded suggestion. As we talk, I think you'll probably find there are some fresh perspectives here, things you already half know, but that might become clearer as we explore together. So the embedded suggestions, you'll probably find some fresh perspectives. This presupposes that insight is coming. And next, I want to transition to actually articulating the reason for the meeting and how we're going to proceed. I might say something like, "I've been involved in some discussions recently where group dynamics in your team have come up, and I want to discuss these with you directly so we can better understand the situation. I've been using this dynamics framework to help pinpoint what might be happening. It's quite simple to visualize, as there's basically only two questions. What's the kind of challenge? Relational, operational, or strategic? And where does it primarily live? Is it in self, team, or system?" Now, you could spend, a whole meeting unpacking those questions in the framework, and that's perfectly fine. In this case, I'm trying to move forward to get onto the scenarios. But at least grounding it here with the framework does make the process feel more grounded and transparent, and it helps introduce this visualization, a visual triangulation, if you like, that starts to separate people from patterns. I might say something like, "Would you be open to having a look at a scenario card? These cards capture patterns that happen in lots of schools. This one in particular is from the operational team dynamic. It's about team culture. I think the card will be useful because we're on the operational side of routines and practices in the workplace, and at the team level because there are dynamics between you and the assistants. I know that if we later discovered it's more about self-regulation under pressure, I could move to 1.1 emotional regulation. If it's really a systems policy issue, then I can step it up to system. But the dynamics deck is flexible. The diagnostic may be just a starting point, but situations do change and new perspectives emerge." So I might say something like, "Let's look at it together. This isn't about you, it's a pattern I've seen in many teams, and it helps us to have safer conversations by talking about them before we ever talk about us. As we go through it, you might notice bits that feel familiar and others that don't. That's completely fine. We'll just see what stands out." Notice the disassociation here, explicitly stating that this isn't about you while introducing the scenario creates some psychological safety. I'm not about to criticize Anna. And there are some embedded future pacings in here. As we go through it, you might notice bits that feel familiar, suggest that she will find relevant insights without forcing identification too early. And also notice that I said that it was something that we can explore side by side, not as a prejudged verdict on her behavior. It helps to add distance between the person and the pattern and helps lower defensiveness. Once I read the scenario aloud, I keep the focus external, asking questions about the characters in the story, not Anna herself. And the prompts on the back of the scenario card are great starting points for discussion. It's not about getting the right answers. It's about opening communication and opening minds. Willingness to step out of her shoes and see things from different perspectives. I might ask a few more open, non-threatening questions. Where could there be mixed signals? What agreements might be missing? Who might feel unheard and why? At this stage, I'm not asking Anna to see herself in this story. That might be too soon, too direct, although she may actually offer it herself. Instead, we talk about the dynamics in the abstract. What I'm doing here is building perspective taking without triggering defensiveness, she's analyzing a story, not defending herself. And only after I see curiosity engage, maybe 2 or 3 minutes, I can then start to pivot, both to shift towards finding solutions, but also to invite unconscious connection to her own situation. I might say something like, sometimes those same dynamics quietly show up in our own teams. Different people, different details, but the same pattern. After a few minutes and we've reflected on the scenario, I might pivot then to the cognitive reframes. Now, at this stage, Anna may have thrown herself into fully associating with the story, but assuming that that hasn't happened, we'll use the cognitive reframes around the scenario, not her. And the aim is to expand perspective, not prescribe any action yet. I would explain before using the cards or referring to them that these are not verdicts, they're lenses to help us to see. They help us to ask better questions. If the scenario team tried these questions, what might shift? What might happen in the scenario as it unfolds with these questions? So I would use the cognitive reframe card. What would better collaboration enable in the long term? What questions could you ask instead of actions that you take? So notice that we're still talking about the fictional team from the scenario. And only after we've explored the scenario fully would I gently invite a bridge. This is the moment to ask if any of the insights here might feel familiar in her context. And the phrasing here matters. Sometimes these scenarios echo dynamics we see in our own teams. Do you notice any parallels or even partial similarities to situations you've been dealing with your assistants? This is an open invitation, not a demand. If Anna sees herself in the story, she can name it. If not, the seed is planted, although this may take time to germinate and a follow-up meeting would be necessary. The ensuing dialogue should draw out any parallels between the patterns observed in the scenario and how other people in her team may be feeling at this point in time, and how her behaviors and how the team behaviors are dynamically linked. Only after that do I invite a gentle parallel. If you imagine a morning briefing with your assistants, where could shared agreements help? What kind of tone or timing or decision rights may there need to be in the classroom, or handover agreements, for example? So if Anna offers just one concrete step, that's enough. You don't have to try to solve everything in one go. Take that suggestion and we can test it and see if it works. If it works, brilliant. If not, we can simply try a different practice or pull another card to work with. The process is iterative. Patterns can shift with just the right adjustments, and it reinforces the idea of adaptability and reduces the pressure to succeed immediately. And if the temperature in the room is still too high, maybe I choose a card from the psychological safety, one of the scenarios there, the silent veto, for example, where people don't raise concerns. It's the same disassociated flow. Read through the scenario, reflect on the fictional team, introduce reframes like, what if raising concerns is a sign of loyalty? And then pick a practice such as the round robin or 2 minutes of silent thinking before anybody speaks. Again, a small experiment, but you can put it into practice. And only once she acknowledges some connection to her own environment and the team do we move on to really fully embedding the practice builders. Remember that we had the A in start, acknowledgement, that comes before any realignment. So this is where the tangible strategies come in, a concrete way to experiment with new behaviors. I'd put a corresponding practice builder onto the table and we could go through it. Co-create roles and responsibilities with your assistants. That way expectations are shared, not assumed. Again, it's an opportunity for triangulation to see what some concrete steps could be taken. I might say something like, Is it a ridiculous idea? Would you be open to give it a go with your team? Would you like a template for that? Or should we sketch the first draft together? And again, this is where language can be very impactful. Would you be open to softens the invitation. And the double bind, do you want a template or co-design, presupposes some action as well. Either way, we're moving her forward, but she feels she has the agency as to how that happens. The session closes with some clarity. She leaves not with vague advice, but with some tangible next steps to try. We'd finish with a single commitment and a date, what we're going to do and how we're going to follow it up. Which practice feels doable over the next couple of weeks? Maybe the team roles charter or one of the other practices? Great, let's test that. I'll check in with you again, shall we say, same time next week. Now, if that helped, we can add a second practice. If not, we can pull a different card and try a different approach. It isn't about blame, it's about experimenting to see what makes collaboration easier. And because we approach the whole conversation through a neutral scenario, Anna's been able to reflect first without feeling personally attacked. There's a couple of final points I want to reiterate. First is we're separating people from patterns of behavior. Patterns can be adjusted and we're not criticizing the person. Secondly, this rarely resolves itself in one sitting. Using scenarios to build perspectives, reframes, to open options and practice builders to build new skills. It sometimes takes a bit of time, but we can learn from the results as we work iteratively through it. That's the process. Calm preparation with frame, to start with a disassociated scenario, stay there long enough to be curious and to engage with some questions and what-ifs, introduce a reframe as a better question, not as a judgment, choose a small practice to test, make a date to follow up, and keep the focus on making the work easier and the relationship stronger, because that's the point of the dynamics deck. But hey, if you want to use the cards differently, then go ahead. That's the beauty of non-linear systems built on visual simplicity and purposely concise and tactile cards. If you want to start with, the 9 dynamics and unpack that as to where people feel most comfortable and they're working most often, that's great. It gives you the tools for thinking, systems for leading, and dynamics for making culture visible.